Hey guys, this is Josh from StellarEclipseStudios. I've been browsing the internet and noticed a lot of people that are just new to After Effects or Photoshop are very unfamiliar with these things called blending modes. I mean, we've got dozens on this list. You can't even see the whole list because it's exiting the recording area. Lots of people that are just starting out, they think that the screen blending mode right here leaves or takes out the black from all the images, and that's all it does. And so they're very confused when they try to put something over something else with a black background, and they've got faces showing through, and it's really creepy, and nobody knows why. Did something possess their computer? Well, the answer is no. A lot of these blending modes are, well, of course, they all have a specific purpose. I'm going to go over some of those today using some footage from a personal project. Please ignore my less than perfect acting. So what we're going to do today is go through the process of creating a fireball using some elements from VideoCopilot's Action Essentials 2 and their plug-in optical flares. If you're serious about compositing or working with After Effects at all, I highly recommend checking them out. That's VideoCopilot.net. Andrew will take that check for $20 at your convenience. So what I've done already is created a composition with my footage, and I've tracked it so that this null object here follows the motion of my hand. We're going to turn the sound off for that until the fireball would have disappeared. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this torch turbulent 02.mov file into my timeline, and it's going to be much too big. So you can go into the scale settings by hotkeys S, select the layer and hit S, brings that up, and you scale it down to the size that you need. Also, we're going to edit the anchor point, which is A, or you can come up here and use the pan behind tool to bring that down to the center of the flame. So you can see that we've got this fireball, this top of a torch that Andrew's made for us. So we can change the position, back to our tool, change the position and the scale. If you hold shift and do any of the hotkeys for bringing up parameters, you can add them to each other. So yes, this looks really crappy right now, I understand. I'm going to take this and, well, this is good enough for our purposes for right now. Normally you would precompose and duplicate each object so that you could, you know, rotate and mess with the timing and duplicate it again. There we go. Rotate it again and mess with the timing. And looks like I'm just going to do it anyway. So we're going to precompose. Control-Shift-C is that hotkey, and you're going to move all attributes into the new composition. When you double-click and open that up, you know, whatever, that's happy. So you come back in here, and I've decided I don't like where this is anchoring. It's not necessarily a huge deal whether this is right on center or not, but because we're going to be using optical flares later on, it's nice to just have, without having to use any expressions, it's nice to have that centered in a happy way. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our pre-comp, we're going to rename it to Fireball. It's also a good idea to name all your assets. This is footage, this is tracker. Now we could colorize the fireball, via a curves adjustment, or we could use hue saturation. I think I'll do that because I like blue fireballs. For some reason, blue is just cool to me. So we'll increase the saturation and bring the hue around until we find a color we like. I like this color right here. You'll also notice that there is some clipping issues because the element is leaving its frame. You can solve this by creating an ellipse tool. Start at the center and you hold Control and Shift. And then with that mask selected, hitting F, brings up the mask feather and feathering it out. Don't see the clipping, and it's still happy. Now, back to the arrow tool. Now you'll note that obviously I don't have any practical lighting in this set. This was all done with natural light. It's outside, and my hand would be lit up by this massive fireball in my hand because this is obviously huge. But because this was zero budget, I don't have any of those things, so the compositing is going to be less than perfect. But if any of you have ever looked at fire before, you can see things through it. And so this is where blending modes come in, because if you just set the opacity, you hit T to bring up the opacity. If you just set the opacity, it's not quite what we're looking for. We still want the intensity of the flame, but where it's not quite as hot as say right here, where it's more like here in this blue area, we want some of the background image to bleed through without getting rid of the strength of those highlights, like lowering the opacity would do. So let's go and look at some of these blending modes. So we've got up here normal, dissolve. Dissolve turns the transparent elements. It decides either yes, you're going to be opaque or not, and gives you a very hard pixelated look. And if we ran preview that, it doesn't look very good. It's definitely an interesting look, and I'm sure it has its place, but not right here. Dancing dissolve is much the same, except it doesn't keep the same, like the pixels will dance around a lot more. Much easier to see when you have a static image that's kind of half transparent. But again, for our purposes, maybe that's what you're looking for. It's not what I am. So we come to what I like to call the darken section. And anything in this section is going to take your top layer right here and use it to darken the bottom layer. So let's use darken for example. It'll pick the darker pixels and overlay them. Any pixel that's pure white just becomes strictly transparent. And that's what all of these do to varying degrees. Now darken is very subtle. Multiply is harsher. Color burn, it's just like in a photo lab. It's burning the images based on how much light you're letting through. Classic color burn goes back to an older method used by older versions of After Effects and Photoshop. Linear burn, likewise. Darker color simply takes the luminance values, and whichever has the darker luminance, that color shines through. But the hue and the saturation stay the same. So, this is best used when you want to make things darker. However, when you've got things that are light, for example, fire, you want to come into the lighting section. You've got lighter color. This takes whichever image has the lighter luminance values and just pushes them through. So if this top one is darker, it doesn't shine. Linear dodge is very similar to add, and they both tend to bring the color out and push things closer to white. Lighten is less harsh, holds color more, but less transfers through. Screen, again, colors tend to get washed out. Color dodge, these all have different methods for doing things, but they all lighten the image and, as you can see, still let stuff from the background shine through. As you can see the edge of my thumb here and the highlight on my thumb. Okay, next we're going to move into overlay. I'm not sure exactly how this works, but what it does is I know that it takes any value at middle gray and puts that strictly as transparent. Anything lighter than middle gray, it brightens the image. Anything darker than middle gray, it darkens. And of course, hue and color have to come into that. And this entire section works on the same principle. That it pushes lighter things to become lighter and darker things to become darker. Anything up in the lighten section does not darken the image at all. Likewise, anything in the darken section will not lighten the image at all. Keep that in mind as you experiment. So you can see here that with, say, vivid light, darker places are becoming even darker, and lighter places are becoming even lighter. Pin light, hard mix. Hard mix goes to extremes. Now down below you've got difference and what I call the invert section. Now difference, what it does is it takes the closer a value is to white on the top layer that you're setting to difference, the more likely it is to be inverted. And the item below, the closer that is to black, the less likely it is to be inverted. You'll notice that right here, essentially what it's doing, it's taking the difference, or subtracting the two layers. So the top layer has white values of 255, 255, 255 for all the RGB values, and the bottom layer is closer to black. I'm set up for decimal at the moment, so it's hard to explain the difference between those two. But you can see, right here, RGB for the white is, or the highlight in that is 0.6, 0.7, 0.8, and underneath it we've got 0.2, 0.1, and 0.1. Or at least we would have 0.6, I'm sorry, 0.8, 0.9, 0.9, and if we set that back to difference, with the difference of the two. 0.8 minus 0.2 is 0.6, 0.9 minus 0.2 is 0.7, etc. Classic difference, a little harsher. We have exclusion. I'm not exactly sure how this does its math, but again, it's very inverty. If I make a new solid layer, new solid, and make them white. Oops. There we go. Make him white, and I set him to exclusion. Everything's inverted. Difference, he's all inverted. Subtract, everything's black. Subtract pure white from everything, and everything becomes black. Divide. Now divide and subtract are new to CS5, so I'm not exactly sure how those two work. However, if you're using CS4, CS3, 7, I don't know why you'd still be quite as far back as 7, but if you are, well, kudos to you. You're not going to have to worry about divide and subtract. I'll have to do a little more research on those two. Just delete you, don't need you. Bring pre-comp fireball back out. Next we come to hue, and we're leaving the recording area, so you're going to have to trust me on these. Hue will simply take the hue values from the HSB color space of the top layer and apply them to the bottom layer. So the saturation and the brightness will still be the same, but it takes the hue from the top and puts it down to the bottom. Saturation You can guess, it takes the saturation values and just pumps them up or down depending on what the top layer is and applies them to the bottom layer. Color takes the hue and saturation, but leaves the lightness alone. Luminosity only touches the brightness. So the color isn't affected at all here, but the lightness is. Now this is where these last blending modes are all about opacity. You will not actually use them for blending top layer at all. Rather, you use it for the layer underneath it, or layers underneath it, for their opacity. So what I've done is set stencil alpha. Stencil alpha takes the alpha channel of the top layer and anything underneath it, because it's stencil, anything underneath it will not show up unless it's within the alpha channel of Fireball. So you can see my finger and my hand, but you don't see it anywhere outside the flame. Stencil Luma takes the luminance values. Have you ever seen an alpha map where white is transparent, white is opaque, black is transparent, grays are in between? Those come into play here. Based on the layer, it treats the layer's luminance values as an alpha map. And again, anything underneath. Silhouette alpha and luma do the exact opposites. It takes that away, and that's really kind of a cool look. I might use that later. Just a color of flame black. Luma, likewise. I like how wispy that is. That's really cool. Alpha add, I'm not entirely sure, as I think these two are luminescent premultiply. I have not worked with these two before. However, I'm sure through experimentation you can figure out what those will do for you. Alpha add might be something for stenciling. I'm not sure. But for the most common blending modes, I've given you kind of an overview. So, just because I want to see this little guy finished, we're going to make him move with things. I'm going to create a second mask in the center here just to prepare for when everything's done, when the fire goes away. We're going to set his feather to 93 pixels. If you hit MM, brings up all the mask properties. Also, you can hit tilde to maximize each panel while your mouse is hovering over it. I'm going to bring the mask expansion for this guy way down, just so that nothing happens to him. And then because the track point, if we select him, he follows my hand. So I'm going to come back to the first layer, or the first frame, where I've got Fireball where I want him. I've tracked my hand, so I'm just going to parent, using the pick whip, the tracker null. So now, if we RAM preview this, is it perfect? No, but the flames would be wisping a lot more with the motion of my hand. But as you can see, it's following. Okay. Now, I decide, no, I'd best not shoot somebody here, or I've just done the deed and I regret it. Whatever the reason is, I've decided I need to stop doing this Fireball. So, mask expansion. Go up to 215, and that's why. Subtract is where I need to be. Also, I'm feathering too much. 36 pixels. And then we'll set an opacity keyframe just so it turns off after that. doesn't need to be unexpanded nearly as far. Okay, so now you'll note that I have set this back to a normal blending mode. It's not where I want to be, or sorry, an alpha add. I think for our purposes here, we'll set it to add, and then just beef up that saturation a little bit. More of a blue. There we go. Yeah, whenever you're working with blending modes, your color is always going to change. That's just a fact of life. So get where you want it to be, throw your blending mode on, or maybe throw your blending mode on first. Again, what would really sell this shot more than having the flames blending is having some sort of light hitting my hand right there so I'm not in shadow. So we've done an add. Let's RAM preview that. Okay, I like that. I think it looks pretty good. So now we just need to give the idea that there is actually something in the middle of this firebox. It's just... So what we're going to do now is create a new solid. Go to Layer, New, Solid. Alternately, you can use the hotkey Control-Y. And I'm going to create a black solid. Ultimately, I don't think it matters. Make sure it's comp size. And we're going to use optical flares from VideoCopilot. Again, if you're serious at all about compositing, I highly recommend checking out their website. They've got a lot of great products and free tutorials. Now, I won't walk you through the optical flares interface just because there's a lot going on here that really isn't necessary for the purposes of this tutorial. So, we can see we've got this massive lens flare, and it's not exactly what we want. It's not doing anything. Well, the first problem is it's black, blending mode. We can render it on transparent. Somehow that just doesn't do it for me. I'm going to go into the add. Nope, I'm going to go into the screen to keep a little more of the color. I'm going to move it down here, and we're going to play with the brightness. So we'll say 60. Okay, that actually looks really good. The problem is, go to a later frame, it hasn't followed. Now, I'm going to do some quick expression work. If you've done anything with After Effects before, again, seriously, you'll know that After Effects has a fantastic expression script editor. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at it in here, in this big window, so I can show you what I'm doing. We're going to Alt-click, hold Alt and click on the position stopwatch, and use the pick whip to select the position of the tracker. And what this should do then, oh, and that's what happens when you move the anchor point. So I'm just gonna have to be a little dirty about this. I apologize. Oops, let go. +6, comma, -31. Let's see what that does. Sends it in the opposite direction. So instead of adding, we're going to subtract. Bam. Okay, so now what this is doing is taking the position right here, taking the position of the layer tracker, and then subtracting the difference from where the anchor point is. Again, if you want to learn a lot about expressions, Andrew Kramer does some great stuff on VideoCopilot. I highly recommend. I cannot stress enough checking him out. Add just a little bit of flicker. Do 10% flicker, speed of 6 times a second. And I want it to be sharp because it's energy. I'm barely containing it. I could kill myself with this. RAM preview that. Okay. Well, subtlety is the key here. We don't want to draw too much attention to itself. I might add just a fast blur to that, just because it feels a little sharp for the rest of the footage. Blur it out 2 pixels. That looks better. And we can also set the color to kind of match. No, we'll use tint there. Okay, so now come back to here. We'll look at all the keyframes. If you want to look up all attributes that have keyframes, just hit the U key. And we're going to set a keyframe for the brightness. So now we can just have those 2 up, get rid of or minimize tracker, so I can see what's going on here. All right, this is just a little bigger. Okay. So here's where the flames start going away. So we'll set that to 0. Maybe have that end just a little sooner. So it stops producing the flames. It's done producing. Oh, right there. Go ahead and RAM preview from the current time. Needs a second to render. Okay. Now normally I'll probably also add some particle effects to this, but we're just keeping it simple here. We're already running at a half hour. So, the last thing you'd probably do to this is add an adjustment layer with the curves for some color correction. Add a contrast curve to that. Okay, up the blues, down the reds a little bit. I don't know, flavor to taste, or if you've got another way you'd like to do your color correction, there's a synthetic aperture, it has their color finesse. Magic Bullet Mojo, or any of their products, are fantastic. Do what you feel is best. But here we've got the finished product. Without blending modes, we wouldn't have known how to do any of this. Wouldn't have been able to do any of this. I hope this has been somewhat informative. And here's our final product. Okay, well, I hope this has been informative, and look forward to seeing you guys again. Again, I can't stress enough, VideoCopilot.net. It's a wonderful website, and you'll learn a lot from them. I'm Josh Badger from StellarEclipseStudios, and we'll see you next time.